What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lasser Cast, and I am super excited because we have yet another awesome writer on the show. We have Mr. Danger Slater, who is here to talk about his book Moonfellows, as well as some of his other books that he's put out in the past few years. I just met him at the Ghoulish Book Festival a couple of months ago, and I've just been dying to have him on the show. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks. You said you're super excited. That's exciting for me. I get excited, but not super excited very often. So,
Well, I just drank like a big Coke Zero from like Circle K, so that probably adds to it.
Yeah, I actually really like Coke Zero. It tastes just like Coke to me. I do those. Do you have any of those Coke coffee mixes?
I know what you're talking about. I've never had one of those though.
Dude, they're fucking delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't think so. I remember my girlfriend telling me that another writer we know, Laura Lee Barr, was talking about how she liked to mix RC Cola with her coffee. And we were just like, that's fucking insane. What are you talking about? And then we saw that Coke shit for sale and I tried it. And I was like, she was right. This is delicious.
Well, so do you need like a lot of caffeine to write? Like, do you have a day job too, or
not currently? I probably need one. It's not, you know how it is, dude. Money is like so unpredictable in this business. There might be moments where things are working pretty well, and then that shit dries up very quickly. And unless something happens or there's some other bump or you have something new out, you got to figure out what the hell to do in the meantime. And yeah, I'm kind of coasting right now, waiting to see how much momentum Moonfellows picks up before I commit to something. I have two conventions I'm going to in September, and then a trip to visit my parents in New Jersey at the beginning of October. So it's a little hard to kind of look for a job and be like, I also need out for an entire month right after you hire me. So.
Right. Oh man. Yeah, that's the reason why I even asked that was because I write too, and I do these shows. And I have, two kids and I have a day job. So it's like I have to just drink a lot of caffeine just so I can do the things I want to do,
I just like it, man. I'm one of those guys. I kind of have this like even keel. I feel like I kind of have this baseline where I'm not really too excited or too unexcited about anything. But when I just start drinking caffeine, I can feel it like waking up inside of me, this energy. And then I drink too much because I don't know how to say no. And then I'm like, well, I'm fucked. My body's vibrating. I can no longer concentrate. I'm just uncomfortable.
Yeah. I actually just saw like a TikTok the other day that was just about that, where it's just like, I'm gonna drink one cup of coffee, I'm gonna drink two, and then they get to four, and then they like almost die,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you said that
the fourth one. I do three cups when I'm writing, and that's it. Really? I know if I drink that fourth one, I'm fucked.
Right. Yeah. Well, you mentioned that you were gonna go visit your parents in New Jersey, and I remember that the one conversation we had was right when you were doing that campfire story contest. And so I went up to you and you told this cool story. You were the first one to go and do the story. And I said, I'm from Staten Island, which is pretty close to New Jersey. And I was wondering, that story, you said it was kind of from like a personal place, it's like a kind of based on true stuff. Did you have like kind of creepy experiences when you were a kid?
Man, I just want to say this about that campfire thing. We're talking about the Ghoulish Book Fest. There was the campfire thing. There was, we told campfire stories. There was 4 of us. I was trying to play it straight. Do a very serious, like, I want to tell a creepy thing. I looked up how to tell a campfire story. I'm like, you got to add sound effects. I had this like footstep thing. I was hitting my shoulder to add to the ambiance.
Right.
And then at the end, the last 2 guys that go, Brian Asman and Andrew Hilbert, just went fucking full goofy comedy, and it was killing. And I'm like, I should have known to go silly. I've gotten a lot of good feedback just from that story, though. People were like, I enjoyed that the actual campfire story you told instead of a fucking long form joke.
Right, exactly. It's like that's the deal is that like, I was going to do it too, and I chickened out before it was my turn. But like, I was going to do it just like your story, where it's very serious. And then,
Yeah. So that is like that. a lot of what I was talking about in that story, I was talking about these guys from my hometown that lived in the woods. It was kind of a rural New Jersey town, rural for New Jersey. New Jersey rural isn't quite like Midwest rural,
right,
but it was not a huge town, and there was a lot of woods in it. There's a lake there, and it was an old resort town for a lot of New Yorkers. They used to call it Little Brooklyn, actually.
Okay.
It's called Hopakon now after the name of the lake, but it was called Little Brooklyn for a while because all Brooklynites in the early 1900s would have their summer homes here. It was a place they could travel to by train. The airlines didn't really exist or they were prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. So this is a place people from the city could drive to. So there's a lot of forgotten stuff in this town that just kind of fell apart and grew over, and the town kind of grew on top of. So there's old train tracks that no longer get used. There's old amusement parks that are just crumbling apart, big old buildings that people haven't lived in for decades. And this shit's everywhere. Yeah. And it was just like a really strange little town. Had a lot of personality. And there was these two kind of weird characters that lived in the woods that we called the skinnies because they were skinny. They probably weren't eating very much now that I'm an adult and thinking about it. But as a child who hung out in the woods a lot, there's trails, dirt bike trails and things to wander around, abandoned houses to go explore.
Right.
These guys, you'd see them every once in a while and we'd be all scared and run away and shit. So
yeah.
It
reminded me of my childhood because, like, even on Staten Island, going back, I guess, like over 30 years at this point, there still was a lot of woods, and you could just go around, and there's all kinds of weird shit out there. And sometimes every so often you see like kind of a creepy person. So that's kind of why that story resonated with me. And it's kind of go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was saying you guys had what was his name, Cropsey out there.
Cropsey,
yeah.
Right. Urban legend, yeah. And then there's also the mental institution that they had too. That they did a whole like documentary on that. That's a real creepy place too. But
I find Staten Island to be a lot like New Jersey, like with that same kind of relationship to New York City, like where it's kind of like an offshoot of New York. I mean, it's technically a part of New York City, but it does not feel like Manhattan or Brooklyn or any of the other boroughs. It feels like New Jersey when you're in there. It's very suburban. In that kind of way. Adjacent to the city.
Yeah. And like when you mentioned that, that it was like Little Brooklyn and that people would go there for the summer, I feel like that's kind of the progression is that people go from like Brooklyn to Staten Island, then to New Jersey, and then they eventually go to Florida. That's like the evolution,
I have to tell everyone whose touchstone with New Jersey is that the Jersey Shore. I'm like, those guys are from Staten Island. Those aren't actually Jersey people. Like we got our own version of that, but like what that energy they're bringing is Staten Island energy.
Exactly. Yeah. And I live in Texas now. I left that all behind. So, and then you live in California?
I live in Oregon right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
In Portland.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
I've been there before. Nice. Yeah. Well, I was going to say that with your story that you did for the Ghoulish Campfire, that was very serious. And then you were talking about Brian Asman having this like real jokey kind of story. And I feel like that reminds me of Moonfellows and Puppet Skin. Because I feel like Puppet Skin is very serious. And, it's kind of like this metaphorical story about conformity. And then like Moonfellows is this kind of like absurd kind of comedy. And is there a specific type of story that you feel you are the best at, like you feel like you're the most comfortable with, or are you just like all different types?
Sorry, man, you're breaking up as you were asking the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, that's good though, because I kind of fucked up my words anyway. I was gonna say though, is there a particular type of story that you feel the most comfortable with, or you feel like that's more like your signature, or do you just like to do all different types of genres or subgenres?
Well, okay, that's a really interesting question. I don't make a huge distinction in my mind between what I was doing in a more serious story like Puppet Skin or something that's completely off the wall absurd like Moonfellows, because there's a usually a focus or a point or some kind of emotional core to the story that is what I'm really focusing in on. And so even something with as jokey as Moonfellows doesn't, to me, feel like a comedy. I know it is a comedy. I know there's lots of humor in it. But to me, it is a story about like loneliness, which is also what Puppet Skin is about too, in a lot of ways, or feeling alienated or feeling kind of disconnected from people around you.
Right.
So the dressing that I put it in, it feels like kind of the organic shape the story takes as I'm writing it.
Okay.
But what I'm actually focusing on is kind of that heart at the center of it. And so I'm not really taking that just like intentional approach is kind of what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to make something a certain way. I don't even think of myself as a genre writer. I use a lot of horror tropes. My books are horror books.
Right.
But they're also bizarro books. They're also comedies. Moonfellows is sci-fi and alternative history, and it's kind of presented like a fairy tale. And it's like got all these elements that I don't want to try and pigeonhole an idea into being a certain thing, because I don't want to limit myself as a storyteller.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I just was like so curious about like your thought process when you made it, because honestly, I've never read a book like Moonfellows. Yeah. Like I kind of get stuck in those little genres. Like I get stuck in like just straight up horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and like I couldn't really compare it to anything else that I've read. Like the closest thing I could compare it to is like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I know that's not really the same kind of thing. Yeah. It's just like that idea of like taking sci-fi concepts and just like making them as absurd as possible. Like, is there anything that you could compare Moonfellows to?
I did a little afterward at the end of the book where I kind of threw down a few of my influences of where I was kind of coming from. And a lot of it was the early 19th century or the late 19th century, early 20th century science fiction writers and filmmakers. George Méliès, who made A Trip to the Moon and The Impossible Voyage and a couple other films about space travel in the early days of silent film, where we knew nothing about science back then. We knew nothing. Like we were 70 years from fucking landing on the moon, basically at that point. Right. And so there's a lot of speculation on how we could do these things. People have always looked at the stars and kind of dreamed of what could be out there or what any of this means. But I wanted to take that same kind of approach that these early science fiction writers would take with science, going, well, what is a logical or at least plausible in its own kind of contained way explanation of how you could get a bunch of people in the early 1900s to the moon. And then once you kind of open that idea up, you go, okay, this is the world. You kind of keep snowballing. You go, where do you build from there? Where do you build out from there? Okay, they got to the moon in a ruined train car with a kind of helium balloon thing tied to the top of it. Right. Okay, how are they talking to Earth? Well, the guy had to invent some sort of GPS satellite system that does cell phone communication, like even though it's 1900. So I had to kind of come up with silly. It ended up being silly, but because we know that's not how the world works. But I had to come up with a lot of ways to, make it so that it makes sense or is fun for a modern audience in those ways. That's kind of just breaking the rules constantly, the rules of reality, the rules of logic. But also not breaking the rules of its own logic. Yeah. Like it's got that self-contained logic where, and there's this kind of one-upsmanship that I like to do when I'm writing. It happens in Puppet Skin too, where you start with a kind of weird premise, and then I push the idea to that limit as quick as I can. I go, okay, someone thinks this is what this book is. Let's get there by page 4. Like, let's get you there as fast as possible, and then go, how much further can we take it? This is the next place I think it goes. Cool. How much further can we take it? How much further can we take it? And keep getting weirder and bigger in the scope and the idea of what a book is going to do. The third, I don't want to, we're not going to give anything away here, but the third act of Puppet Skin really goes full, like, metaphysical,
right?
Like, heady, like, what is this? Psychedelic almost.
Right.
And it's just like, like, I want to push this idea further than someone thinks. Someone goes, oh, it's about a little girl, a little puppet girl who's going to have problems with her parents and she doesn't want to be a puppet or whatever. No, I mean, yes, it is that, but that's not where we're landing. We're landing way, way further than that. And I wanted to do the same thing with Moonfellows, go way, way further than you would think this book would go. Not just in terms of where the story goes, but in terms of, it's so silly, but at the same time, I wanted it to be really sad.
Right.
So it's going deeper inside as much as it can, as much as it's trying to go bigger outside.
Mm-hmm.
Is this making any sense? I feel like I'm just fucking rattling.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, it's almost like a light bulb went off, because I was just like, once you said you always want to get there by like page 2 or like just push it further, that makes so much sense to me.
Yeah.
Because, I've been reading a lot of horror just for this channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have certain expectations as a reader as to, like, this is when this is going to be revealed. This is when you're going to kind of figure out what's the main idea. But it's like, you're right. You just get right to it in Puppet Skin. And like Moonfellows, I remember, because I don't want to spoil either book for any readers, right? But I remember that Moonfellows, there's this one part where it seems kind of serious, a little bit absurd, and then all of a sudden just kind of goes off a cliff. Like when the guy gets recruited for the mission. I'm like, okay, well, this is like ridiculous. And so that makes so much sense what you're saying.
Yeah, I have this book called He Digs a Hole, where it's about this guy and his wife, and they have marital problems. And he's dealing with it he cuts off his hands and puts 2 shovels on the sides of his hands and just starts digging this hole in his backyard as this kind of way to deal with his problems. And be like, I can't turn back now. If I cut my hands off and I am now just a man with shovel hands, this is what I do. I dig holes. It's obviously a metaphor for some other things going on.
Yeah.
But in a normal book, you'd be like, oh, that's like the second act turn when he cuts off his hands, right? That's now we're going to get into me story. No, that's happening on page 1. Like, I want to be right there. If you're not on board with how weird this is right away, you're definitely not going to be on board with how weird it gets by the end of the fucking story.
Right.
So, I just like going, Kurt Vonnegut is one of my favorite writers. And one of his advice is, one of the pieces of advice he gave to writers was to start the story as close to the end as possible.
Right.
So I always try to do that. If I'm going to start a story, like, why not start in the second act and then make the second act the first act? And the third act is the second act. And now we have this third act that is like, I didn't see this coming but it makes sense in the story, but I didn't see it coming. Because this is not the way things are typically structured.
Right.
Yeah.
And see, that kind of leads into a question I had about Moonfellows too, and just about your writing in general. I know that it's like cliche to be like, are you a planner or a pantser? Basically, like, are you making an outline? Or are you not? Like, I felt like with Moonfellows, we kind of get introduced to the character, but we're already kind of towards the end of his story. And then we see him like get recruited for this mission. Then he's on the mission, but then we go back for the training. And like, is that because you're like super eager to get to certain points and you're just like writing it on the fly, or do you have it like mapped out?
I do a lot of plotting, but Moonfellows I didn't. There was a lot of on the fly going on, but there was a huge edit that I did to the book from its original form
Yeah.
About a month before publication.
Oh, okay,
and I cut about 14,000 words from it. I cut almost a third of the book out. Just any plot point that didn't seem to focus on what it was doing. This wasn't not at the behest of my editor. He gave a few pieces of advice, but I just kind of recognized what I felt the story needed. But one of the things he did tell me was, you need to get them on the moon quicker. This is called Moon Fellows, and they're not on the moon yet. Which is kind of going against what I was just talking about. Start as as close to the end as possible.
Yeah.
And it's because in the original version, I kind of framed it as a. This is not how the book played out, but I kind of framed it as a letter that the main character was writing, kind of telling his experience. That's not, I got rid of that thread completely. There was a whole thing about how he got all the materials that he was writing this on and what he intended to do with it. Didn't seem prudent to the story itself, so it went. But I had them jump forward in Moonfellows to the moon and then back to the training because I wanted to Max's point, my editor, get him to the moon sooner. So I kind of put them there, and I used that section to kind of go through a lot of the expository information about how this mission is going to work. So you could be there at the end and seeing what they're planning to do once they end up on the moon. And it also works as kind of a teaser for everything that's going to come at the end of the book. I was able to kind of foreshadow lots of little things that were happening, particularly with the captain and certain things that come to light with him.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned your editor, and for those people that don't know, like who haven't read your stuff, for this book, the editor is Max Booth III, right?
Yeah, and he's the one who put it out too. Yeah,
right, and that's under Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing, right? Not Ghoulish Books.
Yeah, he's told me that he's kind of focusing more on the Ghoulish name now and a lot more of the horror stuff, but he actually accepted this book like little less than a year and a half ago. He's just like, this is kind of where I can slot it in, man. Like we're kind of booked out, but I want to publish this. So it kind of had a long wind up, and that was even before Ghoulish was announced or a thing. So it's kind of the last of the Perpetual Motion Machine books as he kind of focuses more into Ghoulish. There's not much of a difference.
Yeah.
In terms of what the material is, as far as I can tell, except for just kind of a rebranding.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, they've been like going so strong. I mean, especially with that festival. Like, I just feel like, I always get newsletters from him and updates on what's going on, and they're just putting out so much stuff,
Yeah, I want to sing Max's praises because I think he is like this boon to the indie horror industry. Yep. He is just kind of this force of nature. I don't know if he realizes it, but he is just like this magnetic dude that is, and I find him really inspiring because he's one of those guys that's like, if it doesn't exist, I'm going to fucking make it myself.
Yeah.
He's like, there's not a cool book festival for books here in San Antonio. I'm going to make it myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's a hell of a writer. He's so fucking funny, and he's just right up my alley. Yeah. His writing.
Yeah. So he wasn't at StokerCon. That was right after the Ghoulish Book Festival, right? But you were there, and I remember like on Twitter there was a lot of buzz about you just having like a lot of peanut butter or just peanut butter sandwiches, right?
Yeah. I made this like joke about bringing only peanut butter sandwiches. And I was like, but it was like a practical thought in my mind of like, I'm going to be at this convention where it costs hundreds of dollars for a ticket. I'm spending all this money on a fucking hotel room.
Right.
My publisher, not Max, but my other publisher was there and selling books. So I was able to sell a few books while I was there, but it's not really a convention to make money at. That's not the purpose of this. It's a industry convention. It's an awards dinner. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I need to figure out how to cut corners everywhere I can. Let me bring as much peanut butter sandwiches as I can. And I started joking about it on Twitter. and people were responding. And then I just kind of kept rolling with it. And I started, I ran out of peanut butter sandwiches. I went to the store. I bought some stuff to make more. Somebody else went to the store for me and surprised me with more materials. I started inviting people up to the room to eat peanut butter sandwiches. I must have given out 20 peanut butter sandwiches over the course of the weekend, just to anyone who was hungry. Hey, I got peanut butter sandwiches for you. I'm like the Italian grandma making sandwich. I hope your kids are hungry.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
It's like that guy that makes like the grilled cheese sandwiches like out of his apartment. Have you ever seen that guy?
No, it sounds like a Portland thing, to be honest.
Right. I can't remember what city. It's either New York or it's like Portland or something. Yeah. But it's just like a dude. You go to his apartment and he has this long line where he's giving out grilled cheese sandwiches. It's like
he just gives
the horror version.
Yeah,
what's that?
He just gives his sandwiches away.
No, he sells that shit.
Okay.
Yeah, with a Coke too. Yeah.
That's
but you were doing it out of the goodness of your heart.
Yeah, I was just having fun, and someone was like, "I thought you were joking." Like, I saw these things on Twitter. I thought you were joking. And I'm like, I was joking, but the joke is that I'm actually not joking at all. That's what makes it funny, that I'm being serious. It's like, I don't know, man. There's a part of me that's kind of like always living my life like I'm a fucking performance artist or doing this kind of stuff where I'm like, it's fun to kind of build these kind of things around yourself to lean into jokes, I guess, and make them not joke. Like, I kind of have that like Andy Kaufman kind of approach to humor a lot of times where I'm like, the joke is we're not joking. The joke is we're all a part of it. You didn't even know you were a part of it, and you're a part of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, are you familiar with comic books at all, or?
Yeah, no? I just finished reading Saga. Like, I know I'm a little late to the game, but but we're only halfway through the series. But I literally just finished like 2 days ago. It was freaking awesome.
Oh yeah. Well, I was gonna say that like there's this one comic book writer. His name's Chip Zdarsky. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but
I'm not familiar.
You kind of have like a little bit of a presence like him on Twitter. I feel,
Oh, you broke up again. What?
Oh man, the reception sucks today. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it might be my fault. I don't know.
The reason why I was bringing up comics is because there's this guy named Chip Zdarsky, and I think that you kind of have a presence that's kind of similar to him on like Twitter, where you were talking about making a persona, like you kind of seem like a fun guy and like just kind of goofing around a lot, and it just comes through,
Yeah, I mean, that is who I am. I'm not like pretending to be somebody else or anything, but I'm on a public stage at all times, when I'm on Twitter, when I'm at a convention, when I'm hanging out with people in this capacity that I am a writer. So I go, let me lean into these aspects of myself that I think are the most fun, the most interesting, and the most me aspects, I have sad bastard moments all the time, but no one wants to read that on my Twitter feed. I'm not going to do that. That might work for somebody else, like, let's deal with this. And I'm your guru of sadness, and I will help you. But I want to be like a slacker king, that's kind of what I am, like not king as in Stephen King, but like the king of the slackers, like
right.
Yeah. The joke is, not the joke, but part of that is as I'm working all the time still. Like, I'm not slacking at all, but it is. I understand the kind of energy I bring to the table, and I just kind of lean into that. Yeah.
Well, so like, what does your workload look like? Are you just like writing for hours every day, like an 8-hour day?
I wish I could do 8 hours, unless I'm like literally under a deadline where I have to make a certain thing happen by a certain time. I go until I feel like my energy or attention is kind of petering out, and that happens at around the 4-hour mark. So I get up. I'm basically done with my writing day by noon. I wake up pretty early, maybe 7 o'clock. I read for an hour, and then by 8 8:30, I'm at the computer doing as much work as I can until my energy drops. And like I said, right now I don't have a second job, so the rest of my day I use to read more and watch movies and hang out with my girlfriend and do whatever. And if I had to get another job, a part-time job or whatever, it would probably be, I would work later in the afternoon, so I wouldn't fuck with that writing time in the morning.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the ideal situation, right? Like I've interviewed a couple of different writers on here. One of them most recently was like Laurel Hightower. She was at the convention with us, right?
Yeah.
And it is either kind of like you just do all your writing when you first wake up, or you gotta like squeeze it in when you can, anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's whatever works. Figuring out what works for a person is kind of, and then kind of building what your day around that. Obviously people have different responsibilities and different things that they have to take care of. I live a pretty Spartan lifestyle here. I have a small apartment. I split it with my girlfriend, and we got no kids. And there's not really, my overhead is low, is what I'm saying. It's not nothing. I live in a city, but it's low compared to what a lot of other people have. So I don't have to. I have the luxury of building a life around when I want to write and focusing a lot of my good energy I have on the day on that. I go, if I have to get a job and be tired, like, let me be tired at the job. Like,
right.
Let me use my good time for my brain time for getting shit done. To the ends I really want to get things done, which is, writing more books and making movies and doing what I can on that end.
Yeah. Shit, yeah. Well, I mean, like, speaking of movies, right? One of the other guys that was at the convention or the book festival was I have his name written down. I always forget it. Lucas Magnum, right?
Yeah.
Lucas Magnum. And he tweeted out this thing the other day, which was like all the things that inspired his book that just came out. That was Digital Darkness, right?
Yeah.
And I felt like I've never read that book, but I thought that was a really great way to like draw people in, was to just say like, oh, I'm inspired by this, and this. And you said that you mentioned that in the afterword. Could you kind of tell our viewers like things that literally inspired you? I know that you mentioned that one particular film, that black and white film. I can never pronounce the director's name correctly though. Méliès.
Méliès, yeah. It's French, so
yeah.
You could do like the American George Méliès or Jorge Méliès, whatever it would be for the Frenchman. But yeah, that was one of my main jumping off points, and a lot of early H.G. Wells and Jules Verne stuff too. There's an H.G. Wells book called The First Men in the Moon, which revolves around these two guys getting to the moon using a made-up molecule that he names after himself, which, if you read Moonfellows, there's a made-up molecule that is literally the plot engine, and it's there's a very winking name to it, essentially.
Right.
But it's part of the plot engine that everything revolves around. But in true form, that's not really what it's about. It doesn't really matter at the end.
Right.
And I also talked about The Little Prince, which I forgot. I don't know how to pronounce that guy's name either. That's a fucking another French name. These Frenchmen. You know what? Frenchmen write existential literature. They ask big questions. That's kind of what French art is. A lot of it focused on, even to this day. So I kind of have always been drawn to that stuff.
Right.
But yeah, Little Prince is a book that I read when I was young. And it kind of does a lot of that kind of childlike reimagining of the world, trying to look at the world through a different lens. And it also involves someone being alone on a planet. They're in a desert, actually. A man meets a child in a desert.
Right.
And they have a conversation. And of course, Star Trek, that was another one, was one of my main things. Kind of why I wanted to have a cast of characters instead of just like one guy. I wanted that kind of cast of different personalities, all from different backgrounds, coming together to do this thing.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, like you get that sense when they're all flying to or heading to the moon, and then when they're actually there, it is that kind of diverse kind of group like you have from that original '60s Star Trek. I mean, all the versions of Star Trek, but that's the one I was reminded of the most. And,
yeah, and they had that. I love that kind of campy, low budget kind of look to stuff too.
Right.
I always, when I was picturing it in my head when I was writing the book, I'm like, I wonder what people are seeing, if they're seeing this like a film set, because that's kind of what I wanted it to feel like. Not like a film set, but like a fairy tale. It is framed as a fairy tale. So it doesn't involve kingdoms and a lot of gnomes and all that shit that people normally associate with fairy tale, but structurally and thematically, it has that kind of thing that a fairy tale does. And I don't think when people think of fairy tales, they imagine the real world at all. They go, it's like a storybook. I'm stepping into a storybook. And so the world looks and feels like a storybook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that with both of your books that I read, when I would envision a scene, it was always like a music video versus like with other writers, it would feel like very literal, like where, I'm like, oh, I'm in this world and this is what the dirt looks like and stuff. Like I think, there's the Smashing Pumpkins music video that's obviously influenced by that Millier movie.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was envisioning a lot of times, especially when you would like describe like the technology and stuff. That's what I would envision. And then like for Puppet Skin, it was kind of more like a Tool video or something, and
yeah,
we were talking about like a persona before. For me, I felt like your books are more like music videos and it's kind of like more like a rock thing versus like literal. Like I feel like fantasy and sci-fi can get very like literal and it's all about like the world building. I feel like your stuff is more metaphorical.
100%. Everything usually means something more than what it is, like what it literally is happening. There's always some sort of thread where I try not to have things that don't feel that don't have anything to do with the themes of the book. So even when I'm building out the world, it's all staying true to the theme of what I'm trying to express. I love that you said Puppet Skin reminded you of a Tool video, because I was thinking a lot of Coraline specifically when I wrote that book. And I always envisioned, if that book ever became a movie, it as a stop motion animated movie. Because it has that kind of impossible world thing. And that book in particular, there's I don't even know how, like, everyone's controlled by strings that go up to these holes in the sky. And I never explain how they can get from room to room or how they go through ceilings or what any of that means.
Right.
Because to me, that doesn't really matter. The image of something pulling your strings from above that you can't see, that you can't escape from, and it just kind of hangs over you like a giant hole, is more important than trying to explain the mechanisms by which this world could exist. That if I got so tied up in that, that's all I would be talking about.
Yes. I actually had that exact thought when I read both of your books. It's like Brian Asman, just, because we've been talking about him, he just tweeted something recently about how like people tend to overwrite when they are starting out, right? And he basically said that they are explaining like every little detail. And I feel like most writers, they get into that very literal side of their brain where they have to explain how everything works. A goes to B goes to C. And exactly what you just explained, where it's like, you're not worrying about that stuff. It's just like, you just are getting the visual in the person's head. And that really captures it. Because I think that's what makes your work so different from the other stuff I've been reading recently. And that's what's really exciting, because I really haven't read anything like either Puppet Skin or Moonfellows. And like before, when I was asking you, like, is there anything else like your work? Like, not necessarily direct influences for Moonfellows, but are there any other writers that you feel similar to?
I mean, there's there was this fiction scene out here in Portland called Bizarro Fiction that had been around for a long while, and I've these are my people, right? That's who I've been hanging out with. Carlton Mellick is probably the most famous person associated with Bizarro, and he does a lot of this too. His books are very short. They're very metaphorical, and he kind of presents you with some kind of ridiculous world and a character who has to kind of navigate from one end of the story to the other. And usually he writes about female children a lot. Actually, I think he likes that kind of innocent kind of, again, storybook approach to storytelling. But this character has to navigate from one end of the book to the other to survive whatever trial they got to go through. But what they have to go through usually means something more than the literal world that they're in. So, and he's the most famous Bizarro writer, but there's a bunch of people out there. I know Lucas, you were just talking about him, and Brian Asman from BizarroCon, which is the convention they would have out here in Portland a couple years ago.
Oh, does that still exist?
A stripped down version of does now. There was, things kind of went sideways. And it's been like hard for Rose O'Keefe. She ran the convention and runs Eraserhead Press out here in Portland. It's been hard for her to kind of get that back to where it was at its height, like maybe 5 years ago. But we're still all out here. A lot of people are still writing, and I don't want to limit myself. A lot of people hear Bizarro and they think silliness and shit, but I don't think that's what I'm doing. I think I wasn't trying to limit myself to horror or sci-fi or any of these other things. I think what I'm doing is I'm trying to write Danger Slater fiction. I'm trying to just do what feels right and true to me. And however that lands is where it lands.
Yeah. I mean, like, I know that's the way it is with music too, right? Is that like so certain artists just put out all different types of albums, all different types of styles. And the Bizarro thing, I'm so like new to it, and I don't even know about it, that like I'm sure that you've had tons of conversations like this, and it's like, where have you been, kid? Like, I've been talking about this for like 10 years, but like it's all new to me, and it's like super exciting because I'm just so used to like writers spending so much time just trying to explain how everything works. And it's just so cool to just be like, here's the fucking visual, and like that, it doesn't even matter. Just like, this is what it matters. I love that, man.
That's how I got here, because I discovered Bizarro writing. Like I had been trying to write since I was 20 years old, like I was, this was back in, 2000, 20 years ago, 22 years ago, whatever. But I didn't know what I was doing. All I knew is I was making very weird stuff, and people are like, you have ability, but like, this is not, where would you sell this? Where would this stuff even go? Like, right. And there's kind of a very defiant nature to myself. I think my books too, kind of punk rock mentality. I come from a punk rock background, listened and played punk rock myself. So anyone trying to tell me anything, I was always like, fuck you, especially when I was 20. So it was a long struggle to kind of find my place. And it wasn't until I found a bunch of weirdos out here in Portland doing this kind of weird fiction that I went, oh, this is what I've actually been doing this whole time. And I was able, and it felt in a lot of ways like I now had permission to go even further with what I was doing. Instead of going, how do I appease some sort of nebulous entity of like a publisher or some sort of horror, like the quote unquote, who is a horror reader? I don't know. Like, instead of trying to appease or write to what I think other people want, I found these fucking weirdos writing weird shit. And I went, I could do whatever I want. And I should have been trying to do that all along. And so it really threw the door open for me. And I just kind of have been running with it ever since.
I'm a big fan, man. I'm so glad that, like, I met you at Ghoulish Book Festival, and that, I just got to check your book out, and then that led me to Puppet Skin. I want to read your other stuff too. For the people that are just getting to know you too, can you just kind of like plug some of your stuff? That way they know where to find you, like online, and like where to find your work.
Yeah. I'm mostly active on Twitter. It's probably the easiest place to find me. It's Danger_Slater. Or you can go on Instagram, just Danger Slater, one word. I'm not hard to find. In fact, I'm trying to do the exact opposite of be hard to find. If you type my name in Google, you should be able to contact me any way you want, or find me on whatever your favorite social media platform is, except for maybe TikTok. I haven't really jumped on that yet, and I might not. Who knows? Yeah, let's let other people have
I understand that.
But yeah, you should be able to find me on all the social medias if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, I'll put your Twitter handle in the description, and then I'll also put a link to your like Amazon page on there too.
Yeah, of course. I love that you read Puppetskin and Moonfellows, because there's a secret connection between those two books. I kind of did a scene in Moonfellows which harkens back to Puppetskin, or a thing that I mentioned in Puppet. They're not connected in any real way. They are not shared universes. It is not sequels. It's nothing. But there is a moment where I decided to just like touch those two books together. Just for people who like reading my books, just a little wink to them. And you happen to read the two that do it. So that's great.
Yeah. Well, you know what happened? It was the reason why I picked Puppetskin is just because you have it on Audible. And I knew if I listened to an audiobook, I could get through it, in time to interview you. And my kid is the one that picked Puppetskin. So I was like, all right.
Dude, so you listened to the audiobook?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I loved how that turned out. I specifically wanted someone who with a young voice, a female narrator with a young voice, because the main character is a 14-year-old girl.
Right.
And the actress who ended up doing it, her name is Sarah Wolford Johnson. She she had the kind of that sweetness to her voice, but really captured a lot of vulnerability too. Yeah. And it was she just nailed it. Yeah.
She did a fantastic job, and what she has to describe in that book, it's just like so upsetting and disturbing, some of the imagery you put in it too. Like I would be just like going for a walk and listening to it, and I just start cringing, because there's some kind of graphic, disturbing things in it too.
I wrote that book. I was like, I want to write something for teenagers. Like I want to write something like, so I purposefully didn't use the word fuck a bunch in it, like I would in some of my other books. I left out anything super graphic when it came to sexual content, because that would be inappropriate for children. But I didn't really shy away from the violence or the grotesque imagery. And in fact, I kind of dug into it even more. And I don't know if it is even appropriate for, it is for cool kids, I guess.
Right.
But maybe people under 10, it might not work. Yeah, it is about growing up, but I did kind of come at it from a, we've already been there, done that kind of place, so I feel like there is a lot for adults to kind of grasp onto.
Yeah. It kind of reminded me of sort of like, you remember, did you ever read like the Tripod trilogy? Do you know what those are?
No, what's that?
It's like a movie series, or not a movie series, I'm sorry, a book series for young adults where like aliens took over, and the humans have to wear these like metal caps on their heads, and they're like controlled. And obviously that's sort of like what the foundation of the story would be. And then you kind of took it in this weird direction. It kind of reminded me of that. There's a lot of young adult things that are like this, where it's like the Hunger Games or something like that. But obviously it's like nothing like that whatsoever, Yeah. It's got that kind of like dystopian kind of feeling, but it's also just like a metaphor for becoming an adult, And I like that one a lot.
I appreciate it. I always feel like that was like, I'm like, when people say they don't know where to start, I tell them Puppetskin a lot of times, because it feels to me like one of the more accessible books. And maybe because it's a little less jokey than some of the other ones.
Sure.
I know a lot of people, humor's a difficult thing to win people over, especially horror fans. There are horror fans that like humor, but when they hear that a book's got jokes in it, they're sometimes like, no, like that's stupid. It sounds weird and goofy, and I don't want I'm not into that, and
Right.
I'm always trying to fight that struggle where I'm like, no, there's substance here. I'm trying to talk about big questions about life and stuff, and how I feel, and how people, how difficult things are for everybody, and that's what I'm actually writing about. But it's a hard sell. But Puppet Skin, I feel like, is kind of a little more accessible like that, because it's a little more easy to grasp what the book might be about from the description.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And, I like Moonfellows. I want to check out your other work too. We usually have a co-host on here.
Yeah.
My friend
was
Danny.
It Danny? Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, when I go to interview authors, it's kind of like 50-50. It's either just me or me and him. But I want him to listen to Puppet Skin, and I want him to maybe meet you if you ever want to come back on the show, because I think he'd really get along with you. Yeah. So if you ever want to come back, like, what do you have coming up as far as like books that are in the pipeline to come out?
I have 4 other books that I have written.
Yeah.
That are already done. I'm still writing. I'm actually writing a longer version, a full novel, not a novella, full novel version of that Skinnies story that I was telling, or at least it's part. It's a coming of age New Jersey murder mystery, supernatural. It involves those creepy Skinnies guys, and it's kind of all based around that town that I grew up in. But I do have a bunch of books in the pipeline, but don't have contracts signed on some of these, even though I do have agreements that they're going to come out. So by next week, I should be able to make an announcement on one of them. But there is lots of more fiction coming. And if people read Moonfellows and go, I want more of this, I think I'll be able to give them more of that, while also giving them something completely different that they might not have expected, because I kind of live to not subvert myself, but expand what I do in every conceivable way. I have the next book that I think will be coming out of mine, though, is more implicitly a horror story.
Okay.
Like, where I said, I'm going to sit down and write something that is horror that people won't go, what the fuck is this? Like Moonfellows, where they go, how do I classify something this crazy?
Right.
They'll go, no, this is a horror book. It's just completely weird and crazy also.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, there's lots coming. And like you were saying, if we follow me on social media, I'll be able to kind of, you can stay abreast of all these things, your listeners.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we would definitely love to have you back on the show, and I'd like to do it when Danny's on the show too.
Yeah.
And, he can listen to Puppet Skin, and then we can read whatever you got coming up in the pipeline. Then I want to read that Jersey story though, because I liked the campfire version of it, so extended. Yeah.
Cool, it'll feel very, Style like we're saying, it'll feel very familiar to you, the kind of town that I'm building in that one. So
nice, man. Yeah. Okay, looking forward to it. Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, thank you, man. This was great.
Yeah, and we'll see you next time then.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
You too.
All right. So